Welcome to another episode of the MMA Lockcast. I'm your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, your boy on social media at MMALOTN, and the architect behind the MMA Fight Archive, where we are so close to achieving 5,000 fighter profiles for you to browse through and ensure you're leaving no stone unturned when you're researching these upcoming MMA events. We got over 19 different promotions from all over the world that we cover so that you know that this is your one-stop shop if you enjoy predicting, analyzing, breaking down fights. Whether you're a handicapper, an analyst, a coach, a fighter, the MMA Fight Archive is your one-stop shop to ensure you're getting as much information on these fighters as possible before they step foot in the cage on the weekend. This weekend alone, there is a plethora of events between the LFA, KSW, Octagon, Cage Warriors, and the UFC, and that's just a taste of the full schedule that we already got posted for 2025 on the Fight Archive. Every single fighter has been updated, so you can go as deep as June, I believe, which is where Octagon has their main event already scheduled there. You can get started on researching those fights, and you get a 7-day free trial to try it out for free before you have to shell up any coin for that service. And again, it's a very affordable price if this is something that you do and want to save time while doing so as well. So once again, check out the MMA Fight Archive, link in the description below. All right. This weekend, we're going to be talking about UFC 313, headlined by a light heavyweight title fight between Magomed Ankalaev and champion Alex Pereira. This is the no-brainer fight for the 205-pound division. You got the striker Pereira looking to avoid the threat that the grappling that Ankalaev provides, but also the striking that Ankalaev provides that a lot of people might be overlooking in this matchup. But I can't wait to break it down for you guys a little bit later on in the podcast. The co-main event was originally scheduled to be Justin Gaethje taking on Dan Hooker in a 5-round co-main event slot. Unfortunately, a hand injury to Dan Hooker has pulled him out, and in steps Rafael Fiziev, who's returning from a September 2023 injury that he suffered at the hands of Matthias Gamrot at torn ACL. Apparently, he's been trying to get back into action, but he's taken this short notice opportunity to try to even the score with Justin Gaethje. Pretty solid card all around. Although it has taken a few hits, there are still some very fun fights on this pay-per-view card. Yeah, very much looking forward to breaking it down for you guys here. Quick recap of the lock of the night and dog of the night plays for this past weekend's UFC Vegas 103 card. We bet the bullet here in terms of being very confident in an underdog in Hyder Emil. He goes out there and springs the upset over William Gomez. Came by split decision, but I thought it was obvious that Emil was able to win the second and third rounds with his pace and pressure, and we're able to cash a plus 175 underdog as our lock of the night play and take a bite out of the deficit that we found ourselves in the first 2 months of the year. That now brings our record to 7-7 for our lock of the night plays on the year, to a 50% hit rate. Again, not the start that I wanted, but I'm very happy that the momentum is back on our side now. Dog of the night play has been doing pretty well this year, but we did have to take an L this past weekend by split decision on Lucas Almeida as he went up against Danny Silva. Very close back and forth fight. Seemed like Almeida was really starting to run away with it late, but he came on a little bit too late in that second round, ultimately losing that fight on the scorecards. That now drops our dog of the night record to 7-8 for a 47% hit rate. But again, you're hitting 47% of underdogs, you're definitely profiting, and I'm very happy with that mark. Still working close to that 25 unit goal that I have for the year. Do want to remind you guys that again, action-packed weekend of fights culminating with the UFC 313 card. I will be breaking down LFA 203, which goes down on Thursday. So on Wednesday, look for the Legacy Warriors podcast, breaking down that entire card for you guys. And then on Saturday, as an appetizer to the UFC, there are 3 shows taking place over there in Europe, as we have KSW 104, Octagon 68, and Cage Warriors 183. I'll have written breakdowns on the Lock of the Night Patreon page for the KSW and OKTAGON cards, written breakdowns as well as track plays. And then for Cage Warriors, I'll also have those on the Patreon page, but also the first Legacy Warriors podcast for a Cage Warriors card this year as they make their 2025 debut with that Cage Warriors 183 card. So a ton of content coming your way, not just from the YouTube page, but on the Patreon page, getting a little bit more in depth. So make sure you guys hop on over there to get all that great content for this week and hopefully add some extra cash to your pockets when all is said and done. Last quick plug here is going to be my guys over there at GodzillaWins.com, providing your boy a platform to drop written content on a weekly basis. On Thursdays, we drop the main event breakdowns, and on Fridays, we drop the 3 best moneyline spots. So make sure you guys check them out, GodzillaWins.com, not just for MMA, which I run, but we also got basketball, NBA, NFL, NHL. Obviously, NFL just finished up, so no point in plugging that. NHL, MLB starting up very soon. They got you covered with great handicappers and analysts. Make sure you guys checking out GodzillaWins.com. All right. That's enough for the plugs. That's enough for the intro. We got a solid UFC 313 card start for this weekend. So without further ado, let's get right into breaking down this bad boy, which starts off in the middleweight division as we have Jordan Santos going up against Ozzy Diaz. Very fun middleweight fight here. Santos coming in at -180. Now, he earned his contract through the Contender Series this past season, where he was able to defeat Will Curry as an underdog and end up getting his hand raised and getting that contract. That was a tough and grueling fight as Curry was trying to get the fight into the grappling realm, utilizing a ton of clinch and pressure, but Jordan did a great job in terms of stopping those takedowns, nullifying the cage control by landing damage of his own, and when they were back out in space, he was able to land some damage himself and eventually started running away with that fight in deep waters and winning it on the scorecards. This is a guy that trains out of the Bomb Fiend Brothers training camp, showcases some decent striking, obviously some good wrestling as well, as we saw in his last matchup, defensively speaking, but this is a guy that has hovered around 185, 205, even fought a heavyweight if I'm not mistaken, but now settling in at 185 pounds now that he's fighting at the best organization in the world. I believe his striking is the best trait that he brings to the table, but I think his ceiling is still TBD considering the lack of competition he faced on the regional scene and the overrated fighter that he fought on the Contender Series. Now he's going up against Ozzy Diaz, who came up short in his UFC debut against Mingyang Zhang a couple months back, and that was a fight where he was athletically just completely outmatched in that fight. You know, Diaz is a guy that's kind of a solid pressure striker. It takes a little while for him to really start to get his game going, apply that pressure and establish his range, but it's guys that have athletic advantages over him where he ends up usually coming up short, like Joe Pyfer, like Mingyang Zhang, guys that are faster, quicker, and have more power, and they're able to put him away like that. But when he does get to his game, he can pull off some solid wins, like he showed against Bruno Assis, Chuck Campbell, and even Bevan Lewis in his last win before coming to the UFC. He applies his pressure, breaks opponents down, throwing solid combinations, not discriminating to the body, and I think he's a lot better than that start, or at least from what people have been seeing on the bigger platforms that he's been on. Coming up short against Joe Pyfer on the Contender Series, coming up short against Zhang in his UFC debut. I think he has a lot more to show, and I think this is a perfect stylistic matchup for him to go out and showcase that. I think Jordan obviously has some good Muay Thai, but he's going to be facing some legit resistance in the striking realm here, and I think after a competitive first round, we're going to see Diaz really start to pick up the pace here, and I think he'll be able to break down Santos and eventually find a finish in the second or third round. I think he has a cardio edge, and I think just his ability to push the pace and stay in Santos's face with those combinations, mixing it up to the body, will slowly drain that gas tank of Santos, and like I said, lead to a second or third round TKO victory for Ozzy Diaz. Next up, featherweights going at it here as we have Myron Santos coming in at -350, going up against Francis Marshall, who comes in at +285. Now, Myron Santos was able to earn his contract through the Ultimate Fighter the traditional way that most guys would usually get to the UFC, as he was able to finish Con Offley. I believe that was back in August where he earned that contract, showcased a very solid takedown defense game, and then getting to his bread and butter, which is that Muay Thai, just power striking approach. Does a great job in terms of landing that damage, staying out of too much trouble, and then keeping fights upright after opponents want to take him to the ground. His lone professional defeat came at the hands of Dan Argueta in a matchup where Santos struggled to make 135 pounds, and he's just too big for that weight class, and he might even be on the bigger side of the featherweight division, so it's good to see him really starting to settle in at 145 pounds. And at 24 years old, if he can continue to build upon the foundation he's already set for himself, this is a guy that might find himself in title contention in the next 3 to 4 years with the right amount of experience. Since training out of the Extreme Couture gym, originally with PVRT, which is where Jessica Andrade started off her career down in Brazil, Santos has really rounded out his game well enough, implementing that strong defensive wrestling so he can keep fights in the striking realm where he feels most competitive. Again, like I said, just won the most recent season of The Ultimate Fighter, had solid performances showcasing those defensive grappling improvements, and then the striking, which makes him so dangerous in the first place. Now he's going up against Francis Marshall, who was able to finally get his hand raised last time around against Dennis Bazookia. That was on the back end of 2 straight losses to the hands of William Gomez and Isaac Dalgarian. Francis Marshall was a guy that started off, I believe, training in that New Jersey area alongside Kurt Pellegrino, who took him under his wing and has really much groomed him into being a very solid fighter that can make it to the UFC level. Very solid grappling. That's obviously where he ends up making his most success. His hands are really starting to come together as well. But before the Dennis Bazookia fight, he moved down to American Top Team to really start getting some training down there. And it seems like top lightweight contender Grant Dawson has taken a big liking to him, really taken him under his wing as well, and really helped improve the all-around game of Francis Marshall. I think Marshall struggles a little bit in deeper waters, but I think this high-level training that he's starting to get, not just with Grant Dawson, but other guys at American Top Team like Mateusz Gamrot, they're going to really craft this young man into a very solid prospect, which is why it's kind of hard for me to really get on the Myron Santos side at -350. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm still thinking he wins this fight. I may even end up parlaying him by the end of the week here, but this is going to be a competitive matchup with Francis Marshall, showcasing maybe some of those chain wrestling improvements that he's been making, some of the improvements in his striking, but I would really advise Marshall to look to try to get that grappling going, maybe throw a little bit of strikes to try to mask the takedowns and the grappling attempts, but I think Santos is going to be a little bit too strong for him here, be able to shuck off those takedowns, keep this fight in the striking realm, maybe even have some success in the Muay Thai realm, but I think it's going to be the damage-based approach of Myron Santos that will slowly break down Francis Marshall, which will either lead to a third-round stoppage or a decision victory. But I do not want to count out the improvements that the 25-year-old Francis Marshall could be making now that he's been training out of American Top Team for as long as he has. So I don't want to completely write him off here, but I still have to go with Santos as I believe he has a little bit more potential and his striking is going to be the real difference maker. All right, next up, we got a welterweight matchup here between Alex Morono coming in at +550, going up against Carlos Leal, who comes in at -800. Now, Alex Morono has a 13-8 run over his 9-year stint with the UFC, really putting together some winning streaks when he needs to, but now unfortunately finds himself on a 2-fight losing streak. In his last 6 fights, he's suffered 4 of those 8 UFC losses that he has, so which means he's on a 2-4 run over his last 6 fights. BJJ black belt, but doesn't often look to utilize it offensively, but rather defensively, specifically with that guillotine that he's been able to latch on and force opponents to tap out to. In the striking realm, he's a little bit robotic. He likes to utilize that forward movement. Sometimes his durability shows up when it does. It allows him to really drag opponents into wars and chaos, and sometimes his underrated power could come through and he's able to knock some guys out or club and sub them as well. He's starting to slow down a little bit. His durability is becoming a little bit of an issue. His lack of speed really makes it tough for him to get out ahead against guys that are athletically more gifted than him, more powerful, more faster. And I think that's where he's going to come up short based on the type of stylistic matchups that he might have moving forward. And unfortunately for him, he's fighting a 30-year-old Carlos Leal, who's probably very pissed off at the unanimous decision loss that he suffered last time around in his UFC debut against Rinat Fakhretdinov. That was a matchup where we saw Leal do a great job in terms of stopping the takedowns from Fakhretdinov and then punishing him on the feet. But for some reason, no judge scored that fight in his favor, which I think is a complete atrocity, as I think that Leal more than deserved that match, that decision, especially with the new rules, or at least the new judging criteria we've been seeing over the last couple of years, where the focus is primarily on damage. And I fully believe that Leal deserved to win that matchup. But he's a very nasty kickboxer, a guy that has some solid BJJ skills if he needs it as well, and a guy that I'm very proud and happy to finally see in the UFC after a very solid run on the regional scene. He started his career 6-3, but now finds himself on a 15-3 run, with 2 of those losses coming to Sadabusi, and 2 of those losses also being very sketchy. The second loss to C, I thought that was a fight that Leal probably should have won. And then the obviously last loss that he had to Rinat Fakhretdinov, very controversial as well. At 30 years old, I'm glad that he's getting into the UFC in the prime years of his career, rather than guys that have been getting into the UFC a little bit later than they should. And I think this will allow Leal to position himself to potentially become a ranked fighter at a certain point. And to get a big win over Alex Morono here, I think would definitely help his chances. And as I was talking about on the Morono side, it comes down to the stylistic matchup that he has ahead of him. And unfortunately for him, I think he's up against it here with the faster and more powerful and more dangerous striking of Leal. I think Leal will once again expose the durability issues that we've been seeing in Alex Morono in some fights, and I think that will lead to Leal eventually finding that finish in the second or third round. I don't know if that's going to come by TKO or by club and sub, but we know Morono starts to slow down after that 1.5 round mark, so maybe this is a fight that goes over 1.5, but still ends up finishing inside the distance, and I might end up targeting that Leal round 3 prop, as I think that's where he can really start running away with this fight and muster up a finish. So give me Leal round 3. I'm going to go TKO, but again, inside the distance might not be the worst way to go about it. It's probably going to be chalk considering he's finding himself at minus 800 right now, but I think Leal wins this matchup pretty easily. All right, middleweights going at it here as we have Bruno Ferreira coming in at plus 125, going up against Armen Petrosyan, who comes in at minus 145. Now we'll start off on the Ferreira side of things, who's coming off of a submission loss at the hands of Abus Magomedov, and that was a fight where it seemed like momentum was on Ferreira's side in the second round. Unfortunately, Magomedov continuously got to his takedowns in the third and set up that arm triangle choke to get the finish. Now we're not used to seeing Ferreira being pushed past the first round. 11 of his 14 fights have all finished in the first round. None of his UFC fights got out of the first round outside of his last one against Abus Magomedov, and that's where we saw him actually end up getting finished. But I will say, I was kind of impressed with his cardio, especially considering he's not used to going into deep water. Again, he throws with a lot of power. He's a BJJ black belt, so when he decides to take opponents to the ground, he does not lay and pray at all. This guy smashes through opponents' guards, gets to more dominant positions, and either ground and pounds until he opens up a submission opportunity, or just straight up Hulk smashes like his nickname indicates, and ends up getting the finish that way. He's a very fun and entertaining fighter, but I believe his lack of process, especially deeper in fights, is going to make it hard for him against the more well-rounded fighters that he's going to go up against. And unfortunately for him, he's going up against a pretty well-rounded fighter here in Armen Petrosyan, who's unfortunately on a 2-fight losing streak. most recently losing by that nasty double back fist knockout, spinning back fist knockout by Shara Magomedov. And I think that was a fight where I thought the momentum was starting to go into Petrosyan's side, especially in that second round where it seemed like the leg kicks were really frustrating Magomedov, but eventually Magomedov set up that nasty knockout and got that victory over Petrosyan. Petrosyan is now 3-3 in the UFC with an 8-4 overall record, but I think it's his kickboxing that makes him so special and entertaining to watch. We've seen his defensive grappling hold up in a lot of his fights, specifically that fight he had against Gregory Rodriguez, where he found himself in some very bad positions. But then we saw when guys at the level of Rodolfo Vieira are able to get him to the ground, they're able to smash through his guard and eventually find a submission pretty quickly. Although Ferreira has a BJJ black belt, I am not overly impressed with his ability to control opponents on the ground, especially people that have good enough defensive grappling that can stay out of those bad positions and eventually work back to their feet. And I think that's what we're going to see here with Petrosyan, who might get taken down 1 or 2 times, but I think we'll see him swiftly work back to his feet and then get back to his technical striking style, which eventually caused Ferreira a lot of trouble. Now, the metrics on this fight are very interesting. You got Petrosyan standing at with a 5-inch height advantage, but at a 1-inch reach disadvantage. So I think it's going to be very important that he stays true to his kicking game, which will keep Ferreira at distance and then cause Ferreira to make some mistakes. But then the straighter shots down the pipe with Petrosyan, not to mention the footwork that we usually see from him as well, will allow him to stay away from the majority of danger that we see from Ferreira. I think that will lead to a Petrosyan slowly picking Ferreira apart, and I think he ends up taking Ferreira to the scorecards for the first time in Ferreira's career. And that will ultimately lead to Petrosyan getting his hand raised by decision based on his ability to land more effective damage, especially in the second and third rounds. This should be a very fun matchup, and it seems like the public is slowly starting to pile on Petrosyan, and I would still take him all the way up to about that minus 185 line. All right, next up, we got a great flyweight matchup here, and credit to Joshua Van, who comes in at minus 180 for not turning down any opponent that the UFC throws at him. This time around, he's going up against grappling ace Ray Tsuruya, who comes in at plus 170. Now, Joshua Van is on a 2-fight winning streak after suffering his first UFC loss at the hands of Charles Johnson. That was a very back-and-forth fight, which ended up with Charles Johnson winning that fight in the first 20 seconds of the third round after finishing Joshua Van. But Van showcased his patented slow build approach in the Edgar Chairez fight back in September, dropping that first round, but coming on strong in the second and thirds to eventually get that victory by decision. He ended up following that up with a very solid win over Cody Durden in a matchup where he faced a very strong grappler, probably the strongest that he had faced since suffering his first professional loss earlier in his career. And he showcased great takedown defense, great get-ups, and an unwillingness to settle for bad positions, which eventually allowed him to get back to his striking and batter Durden on the feet with his patented combination striking approach. Van does not chase knockouts. He just lets them transpire as he just wears opponents down with nasty combinations, especially to the body, and that eventually opens up shots to the head as opponents start to get a little bit more frustrated, starts to get worn down by the pressure and output of Van, and that ultimately leads to classic Van performances. But I think now Van this weekend will be fighting the toughest grappling challenge of his entire career, going up against undefeated 10-0 Ray Tsuruya, who does a great job in terms of chain wrestling and utilizing unorthodox takedown approaches from trips and throws and tosses to eventually dragging opponents to the ground and just keeping them there. His smothering approach has led to this undefeated record, but we did see him look a little bit human last time around against Carlos Hernandez. Luckily, he did enough in the first 2 rounds to thwart the type of success Hernandez found in the third round as Hernandez really started to come on strong and it seemed like Tsuruya started to slow down. Now, Japan had a big resurgence in 2023 and 2024 with the likes of Tatsuro Taira, Rinya Nakamura, and now Ray Tsuruya. But the 2 fighters that I just mentioned here actually suffered their first losses last year. I believe Nakamura actually suffered his first loss back in February. And then Taira lost to Brandon Royval late last year. So maybe Tsuruya is up next in terms of getting their O snatched out of the loss column. But It's clear that he needs to work on his striking a little bit more, try to set up the takedowns a little bit better, try to be a little bit more efficient with his gas tank and his energy reserves so that he can avoid what happened against him in the Carlos Hernandez fight. This is a close fight. This is one for me where I think the damage-based approach and defensive grappling improvements of Van will likely reign supreme here, but at minus 200, I think it's just too wide. Tsuruya might be able to do what he did to Carlos Hernandez and accrue enough top time that he wins the first 2 rounds convincingly, that should this fight end up hitting the scorecards, he ends up getting his hand raised here. But I think Van has showcased solid ability to land damage even while defending, and I think that's going to be the difference maker here as Tsuruya tries to establish a dominant position. We see Van just land the more damaging shots, get back to the feet, land a few combinations before being taken down again. But this is a close fight that could definitely go either way. I don't want to pay the chalk on Van. If he somehow drops back down to about minus 130-ish, I'd be a little bit more intrigued there, but I want no action in this fight. Maybe the overs if we get a decent enough line there, but I'd kind of be surprised if we see that. But I'm going to go Van here, Van by decision, but very, very low confidence considering the threat that Tsuruya presents. All right, next up. Heavyweights going at it here as we have Curtis Razor Blaydes coming in at minus 300, going up against Rizvan Kuniev, who comes in at plus 250. Now, starting off on the Blaydes side, it's obvious that when he is posed with the biggest fights of his career, he ends up coming up short. And whether it's a number 1 contender fight or fighting for the interim title against Tom Aspinall last time around, that's where he ends up coming up short. All 5 of his losses have come against guys that have been the hardest and biggest knockout punchers the UFC heavyweight division has ever seen. From losing twice to Francis Ngannou, to Derek Lewis, to Sergey Pavlovich, to even Tom Aspinall. And that's where he really struggles. It's clear he's made striking improvements compared to the first time we saw him in the UFC, which led to him, getting that knockout victory over Chris Daukaus, looking good enough, but he can't play around too much on the feet against guys that have too much power. He needs to get to his classic wrestling approach to have success, especially at this stage of his career. He's still 34, which is not the oldest considering heavyweight standards, but if he wants to be successful and try to fight for a title once again, he's got to look for takedowns and try to establish that top control before his opponents are able to bonk him and get him out of there. He has great cardio for a guy his size. His wrestling is obviously one of the best, if not the best, in the division. And it's showcased, especially against Jailton Almeida, stopping the amount of he got taken down a handful of times, but continuously working back to his feet and not eating too much damage showcased that, he knew he was going to get taken down, but he showcased good enough defenses, which eventually led to those Travis Brown, or I believe it was Hammerfist, that he landed to Jailton Almeida while defending a takedown. On the flip side, Rizvan Kuniev earned his contract through the Contender Series by knocking out Hugo Cunha on the Contender Series this past season. That was on the back end of a victory over Renan Ferreira. I believe that was back in 2023, but unfortunately, Kuniev popped for a plethora of steroids, if I'm not mistaken. That got him suspended for a while, but eventually the UFC still decided to give him another shot on the Contender Series, and he came through with it and now finds himself fighting one of the top heavyweights on the UFC roster. As you would expect from a guy like Kuniev, wrestling would be his MO. His striking's not all that bad either. We saw him really try to focus on that against Cunha so that he can earn a contract to the UFC. Compared to the first fight that he had on the Contender Series a couple years back against Santos, he used a very slow burn grappling style that Dana was not impressed by, and that ultimately led to him not getting a contract that time. But the second time was the spot that he needed. I like Blaydes here. I don't think Kuniev has the crazy knockout power that he needs to worry about, but he can get too complacent in terms of just striking with Kuniev for too long. I think he's going to have to mix the martial arts very well here, and I think he'll be able to do so. I think he has the cardio edge as well, and I think if he can push a pace and keep Kuniev on the defensive, he should start to run away with this matchup, and I think he ends up winning it on the scorecards. I can see a little bit of money coming in on the Kuniev side, and it makes sense, right? You got Blaydes around minus 340 a couple days ago. Now he finds himself at minus 300. People love betting themselves some Russians, and people love fading them some Curtis Blaydes as well. So we'll wait until later in fight week to see if we can get an even better line on Curtis Blaydes. But I think he ends up winning this matchup and showcasing why he's still one of the best heavyweights on the UFC roster. So give me Blaydes and Blaydes by decision. Next up, lightweights going at it here as we have King Green coming in at plus 375 going up against Maurizio Ruffy, who comes in at minus 500. Now we'll start off on the green side of things, who I'm still trying to figure out why in God's green earth he decided to go out there and wrestle with Paddy Pimblett, ultimately putting himself into a submission and getting choked out clean. Maybe there was something that Paddy was doing on the feet that was causing Green some trouble. There was those awkward oblique kicks that he was landing that may have frustrated Green and wanted to pull out a grappling heavy approach at that point. But that ultimately worked right into Pimblett's plan, causing Green to get choked out unconscious. Green, 38 years old, obviously not getting any younger, but when he is on, he can put on those performances like he showed against Jim Miller back at UFC 300, putting on a hellacious pace with the amount of strikes that he can throw out there. He landed 186 significant strikes over the course of 15 minutes, showcasing that he can still get into that groove and really put numbers on opponents. His durability is obviously a bit of a question mark, especially with how Jalen Turner was able to put him out at the ending of 2023. I believe that fight was in December 2023, where Turner just bonked him from distance and got him out of there. But when Green's durability holds up, and he doesn't put himself into submissions, this guy's a very tough puzzle to crack because of the volume that he throws with. He has a decent striking defense game where he rolls with a lot of shots, but he stays in opponents' faces and throws a ton of output and offense that usually frustrates and breaks his opponents down. I believe he's still capable of some decent performances, even at 38 years old, but he's going up against a guy that's 10 years younger than him here in Maurizio Ruffy. Now, Ruffy is now 2-0 in the UFC, most recently coming off of a victory over James Longtop in a fight that played out much closer than the odds indicated. We saw Ruffy have some good strikes in the first 2 rounds, strikes that probably would have put a lot of human beings away, considering the flushness and accuracy which he was landing with, but Longtop walked through all of it. And then Longtop came on strong in the 3rd round, pressuring Ruffy, and it seemed like Ruffy was really starting to slow down, which allowed Longtop to control that 3rd round, but unfortunately not come through with a finish, which led to Longtop losing that fight on the scorecards. Ruffy is a very fun fighter, kind of mirroring like the classic Conor McGregor style, a bladed stance, karate style stance, straight shots down the pipe, that straight down, that power punch down the pipe is just so reminiscent of what we've seen from Conor. And he kind of just keeps his chin up a little bit, keeps his guard high, and tries to very much lean on that speed and that accuracy and those reflexes to really get the majority of his wins. He's been one of the shining guys coming out of the Fighting Nerds on top of Gene Silva and obviously Kyle Bahayo, and they're really leading the way from that training camp and coming through with some very spectacular finishes and knockouts. Now Ruffy could add a very big name to his win record here against King Green if he's able to get that victory. But I gotta be honest, minus 500 is a little bit wide here. Seeing what James Longtop was able to do against Ruffy, Green could potentially have similar success. And if his durability holds up, he's going to continue to keep Ruffy on the back foot and really start throwing some combinations and wearing the Brazilian down. I believe that the youth, speed, and power advantage of Ruffy will eventually come through here, which ends up leading to the knockout win. But in a very volatile sport like MMA, you don't know when somebody's chin is going to show up and when it doesn't. Just this past weekend, we saw Danny Barlow land clean shots on Sam Patterson, a guy we've seen get knocked out clean by Yanel Ashmouz. Yet his chin held up, and he was the one that ended up knocking out Barlow as a pretty big underdog. Not saying that Bobby Green, or King Green, I should say, is going to go out there and knock out Ruffy, but you have to keep those things into consideration. If you're paying heavy chalk on a guy to find that perfect one punch, you're up against the odds a little bit more than you're really thinking, and just kind of mindlessly throwing Ruffy into parlays at minus 500. Again, I'm picking him to win this fight, but I believe he should be closer around minus 185, minus 200, rather than more than double that line here at minus 500. I wouldn't mind considering a small shot on green. I think during fight week, we're going to see a little bit more love come on Ruffy as people continue to parlay him and drive that number up. So closer to fight day, I might consider a little bit of a sprinkle on green just because of the odds. And again, if his chin holds up and we get that classic Bobby Green style, I would not count out his ability to get his hand raised here. But the official prediction is going to be Ruffy by knockout, but gotta be very concerned about that minus 500 line that he's at. All right, women's strawweights going at it here as we have Amanda Lemos coming in at plus 115, going up against Yasmin Lucindo, who comes in at minus 135. Now, Lemos is coming off of a submission loss to Verna Jandiroba last time around in a fight where she had no answer for the smothering and very wizardry type approach of BJJ that we saw from Jandiroba. We saw her scramble very well, continue to hold on to Lemos, and eventually find that submission in the second round. And that's really kept Lemos away from her game, which is very much reliant on the power and just controlling the pace with her striking. She's 37 years old, obviously slowing just a smidgen. But for women's strawweight standards, she is a very strong puncher. She has a pretty nasty choke game as well when opponents get a little bit too desperate with some of their takedown attempts. But it's obvious that she wants to try to keep fights standing where she can really pressure her opponents, threaten them with that power, throw out some feints, and then capitalize with some counters. That's Lemos at her best when she can establish that power and try to finish her opponents. Again, 37 years old, getting up there in age, but I think she's still capable of some pretty solid wins. The last victory we saw she had over Mackenzie Dern, she found herself in some pretty precarious positions against a wizard of a jiu-jitsu player in Dern, but she was eventually able to get back to her feet and land more devastating blows, which ended up having the scorecards go in her favor. Now, she's going up against a young Yasmin Lucindo, who's riding a 4-fight winning streak, 23 years old, and coming off of a split decision victory over Marina Rodriguez in a very close fight. We saw Lucindo continuously get the fight to the ground, but when she was forced to strike with Rodriguez, she found herself in some trouble. Luckily, Rodriguez has almost no idea how to work back to her feet, and that allowed Lucindo to get those crucial moments scored in her favor and kind of nullify the damage that Rodriguez was landing in return. She is a training partner of Verna Jandiroba, so I'm not surprised that we might see Lucindo look to get some sort of guidance and advice from her pupil to try to, or her peer, to try to pull off this victory over Lemos. But you gotta look at the fact that she's still quite young. She has 22 fights, which is more than Amanda Lemos has, but obviously the strength of schedule for Lemos a little bit higher than what Lucindo has been facing. But Lucindo, credit to her, she is taking steady steps up in competition, going from Poliana Viana to Karolina Kowalkiewicz to Marina Rodriguez, and now to fight somebody that just fought for the title 3 fights ago. The UFC is clearly giving her a little bit of a push. It's clear that Lucindo needs to get this fight to the ground if she hopes to nullify that dangerous approach that Lemos brings. But I think that she's going to struggle to hold her there as much as she was able to hold Rodriguez. I think we'll see Lemos work back to her feet. I think we'll see her power and athleticism really start to shine through here. And I think she'll be able to land big enough shots to cause Lucindo problems. And I think that could even lead to a knockout victory for the veteran. Again, Lucindo, bright prospect, has all the tools, but I think her inability to keep Lemos down here for a prolonged period of time will cause her a lot of issues, will cause her to get frustrated, and we'll start to see her slow down later on, which will leave openings for Lemos to really capitalize with her speed and power advantage. I'm kind of surprised that the line is continuing to go towards Lucindo here, getting that Lemos a little bit higher. I think I saw plus 125 recently. I'm going to say plus 115 for the sake of this podcast. But again, if this line continues to go up, you have to consider a shot on Lemos, considering the strength of schedule, the power advantage, the striking advantage, and if she can continue to showcase some decent work off her back, or at least some urgency to stay out of bad positions, I think it's going to cause Lucindo a lot of trouble here, leading to the veteran getting her hand raised by knockout. All right. A lightweight matchup here, very fun one, between Jalen Turner, who finds himself at minus 115, going up against Ignacio Bahamondes, who comes in at minus 105. Now, starting off on the Jalen Turner side of things, who just squabbled such a big moment against Renato Moicano back at UFC 300 in a matchup where he dominated him in that first round, but unfortunately found himself in a bad position in the second round and was forced to tap out. I think Turner lost that fight more than Moicano actually won it, but I think it's a big learning lesson for the 29-year-old Turner, who's going to be looking to get back into the win column and try to buck this 2-3 run that he's in over his last 5 fights. We see the power and threat that he produces just after his wins over Brad Riddell and King Green. He has a nasty front choke game that he can apply given the long, 75-inch reach that he normally holds at this lightweight frame. 6'3" as well. Has some nasty power down the pipe, and he's an improving prospect every single time out. He's at a stage in his career where he's not getting gimmies anymore. He's fighting guys that are going to provide legitimate resistance, and he's really going to have to nut up or just falter just as he has in 3 of his last 5 matchups. I like his speed. I like his power. I like his ability to mix things up with the grappling if he needs to. And he's just so nasty with his knees and elbows when he can establish the Muay Thai clinch as well. He's going up against a solid Ignacio Bahamondes, who's now 4-1 over his last 5 fights. That one loss to Ludovic Klein, showcasing some of the flaws that are still in his game, from some of his striking defense issues at times to some of his defensive grappling issues at times. But we saw him really bite down on the mouthpiece against guys like Christos Yagos and last time against Manuel Torres in September and showcase power of his own. This is a guy that often goes, triple digits in terms of significant strikes when fights end up hitting the scorecards because of how comfortable he can get with his striking, with his combinations, with his kickboxing approach. I think we're seeing a lot of improvements in his confidence as well, especially training alongside the newly crowned welterweight champion Belal Muhammad. And I think that's going to give him and instill some confidence in him that he's training with a guy that's taking the same road that he is and the same path to preparation. And I think that could lead to him, getting some high-level wins. He's a guy that I've been bigger on than most people have been in the past. Sometimes it's bit me in the ass, and other times it's come out very victorious and very fruitful, like he did when he fought Manuel Torres and even when he fought Trey Ogden and Rong Zhu back in the day. Very solid striking, like I said, establishes his range very well, but it's going to be very interesting how it plays out here against a guy that holds the same frame. And it's going to be interesting on both sides. Will Turner be effective with his range striking style and his power? Because I believe he has a speed and a hardware advantage over Bahamondes, but Bahamondes is probably the better technical striker overall, which could lead to him being a better minute winner here. I have to lean ever so slightly with the athleticism and hardware advantages that we're going to see on the Turner side. Bahamondes may be more effective over the course of 15 minutes, and if this line really starts to trend one way or another, I might have to force myself to throw some action on whoever ends up becoming the bigger dog. But considering how tight the line is right now, minus 115 either way, I wouldn't be surprised if it ends up being a pick-em come fight time. I do have to lean on the Turner side, like I said. I think his speed and power will allow him to land some big shots on Bahamondes here. And even though it's been hard to put Bahamondes away, I think his durability is just being waiting to be cracked. And I think a guy like Turner, who has deceiving power, will be able to crack that chin and possibly put him away here. Not a ton of confidence. Again, Bahamondes is a very efficient and effective fighter, and I think that could cause Turner some issues, especially if this starts trickling into these second and third rounds. But I'm going to go Turner here, and I think he ends up finding that finish over Bahamondes within the first round and a half. All right. Short notice banger in the co-main event here, as we have Justin Gaethje coming in at plus 125, rematching Rafael Fiziev in a matchup that was a rematch of a fight that took place 2 years ago. Now, Gaethje was originally scheduled to fight Dan Hooker in a 5-round matchup that would have promised the violence of just devastating proportions, but unfortunately a hand injury to Dan Hooker has now prolonged that matchup, which I'm sure the UFC will look to put together maybe by the ending of the year, no matter how this matchup ends up going. But Gaethje's coming off of that knockout loss to that crazy fight that he had against Max Holloway back at UFC 300, and credit to him for taking nearly an entire year away from action so that he can recover and try to still have some solid performances even at 36 years old. When Gaethje's at his best, we know he is a very strong striker. has nasty leg kicks that slows his opponents down, and he just loves creating war and chaos to try to break his opponents down with the combinations that he throws with. He has such thudding power that he's able to just hurt opponents without even, without even looking like he's winding up a whole lot. The head kick that he landed over Dustin Poirier, very nasty knockout there. Everybody obviously remember the pulverizing performance that he had over Tony Ferguson back in May 2020. And I think he's still capable of some solid performances. If his chin and durability holds up for the most part as it has, unless he decides to, willingly engage in the pocket with a guy like Max Holloway, I think he is a guy that can still go out there and have some classic Justin Gaethje performances. He has wrestling in his back pocket if he needs it, but I think that's more of a kind of something to keep his opponents on their toes rather than looking to, push a Dagestani wrestling type approach. I think Gaethje still very capable of high-level performances, like I said, good combination striking, power when he needs it, and his strength of schedule is a huge factor in a lot of his wins, being able to push through some challenging moments and really start to put it on his opponents. And that's where I think led to him actually getting that victory over Rafael Fiziev, where he was able to, he had a slow first round, and I thought he really started to pick it up in the second and third rounds, even though the scorecards were kind of all over the place in that fight. I thought the correct scorecard would have been Gaethje round 2 and 3, and then Fiziev round 1. And I think that we might see a similar result in this matchup. Now, quickly talking about Fiziev, who's looking to buck the first 2-fight losing streak of his career. Last time around, he had a main event slot against Mateusz Gamrot back in, I believe, late 2023. And that was a fight where he won the first round. And it seemed like Gamrot was slowly trying to get to the wrestling once again, and it was starting to wear on Fiziev a little bit. But unfortunately, a bad takedown attempt, I believe it was, caused Fiziev to tear his ACL, and that has kept him out of action this entire time. Now, according to Fiziev, he's been trying to get a fight since September, accepted a fight in September, September, December, January, and February, but nothing came to fruition until this moment where he takes this short notice spot against Justin Gaethje. We know what Fiziev's all about. Nasty Muay Thai, throws in hellacious combinations, has some solid power, building that strength of schedule as well. But when he was given that big opportunity against Gaethje in the co-main event back at, what was it, UFC 305, I believe it was. It was the London card, whatever it was. And Fiziev ended up coming up short against Gaethje. He needs those type of fights to build that experience to try to break through to the next level, especially with him being at 32 years old. Now, even though Fiziev has kind of been waiting for a fight since September, I still have some question marks about him accepting this fight on super short notice, having to fly over from Thailand while having to cut weight and try to make 155 pounds again. That could cause him some issues here against a veteran like Gaethje, who was preparing for 5 rounds of war against a guy like Dan Hooker, which is why I'm kind of surprised that the line continues to move towards Fiziev here. He was minus 130 a few days ago, now finds himself at minus 145. Are people just fading Justin Gaethje because he got knocked out in his last fight? That remains to be seen. But I think Gaethje's, preparedness, strength of schedule, even how their first fight went, it was close. But if you're giving me underdog odds on Justin Gaethje, you got to take it here, especially considering the circumstances going into this matchup. Not to mention, this is the first fight for Fiziev after that torn ACL and recovery. This is his first live action, and to have it against a guy like Gaethje, that's crazy. And the last thing I'll say, I'm not super into reading too much into interviews or anything like that, but to me, it kind of seems that Fiziev is, he's stating that this is a huge risk to take this type of short notice fight, travel across the world. He's insinuating the kind of risk that it is. And that's, to me, kind of already building in an excuse for, if he were to lose this fight. Not saying he's a guy that gives himself excuses. He is not. He is a warrior. He is a guy that goes out there and used to fight every single week as a Muay Thai fighter. But again, I feel like that is a little bit of a hint and a tip of the cap to kind of be like, I might not be at my 100% prepared level to take on a guy of Justin Gaethje's level. So, give me a little bit of grace should this fight not go my way. And I think that's kind of a tell in terms of, him maybe not being fully prepared and ready to take this type of challenge on short notice. So I'm going to go Gaethje. I'm going to go Gaethje by decision. It will play out close, but again, if you're getting underdog odds on Gaethje, you got to take the shot there. All right, that brings us to our main event of UFC 313, a light heavyweight matchup between the most active star the UFC currently has, and Alex Poatan Pereira, who finds himself at -115, going up against Magomed Ankalaev, who comes in at -105. Now, Pereira, obviously on a solid 5-fight winning streak. That included his UFC debut at the 205-pound division, followed by his title-winning effort against Yuri Prochazka, and then defending it 3 times against Jamal Hill, Prochazka once again, and Khalil Roundtree a couple months back. Pereira is a guy that the UFC has started to rely on for these big spots, hoping that he would come through for them at UFC 300, coming in on super short notice at UFC 303 when Conor McGregor pulled out, and then obviously having that big fight against Khalil Roundtree. He's 37 years old. I'm sure he is making a bag and a half every time he steps inside the cage, and it's crazy what he's been able to do with his popularity, even without speaking a lick of English to the media. All he has to say is Shama and put on some spectacular performances, and the crowd goes wild. Now, last time against Khalil Roundtree, fight played out a lot closer than people expected. Roundtree actually won the first 2 rounds on all 3 judges' scorecards, but it seemed like he really started to slow down in third, and that's where Pereira's pressure, his leg kicks, that check left hook start to catch up to Roundtree, and then in the 4th round, we saw Pereira start to really run away with it. Now, luckily for Pereira, the UFC has matched him up with fellow strikers that he can go out there and have success against. Hence why he's been so dominant in the light heavyweight division, besides the first fight that he had in the division against Jan Blachowicz, who actually pushed a bit of a wrestling approach. We saw Blachowicz have success in the first round, holding Ankalaev down, having success there. The second round, we saw Pereira have a little bit more success, get back to his style. And then in the third round, we saw Pereira, have some good success early. Then Blachowicz was able to take him down in the last half of the round, but was unable to muster up any damage, which ultimately had the split decision go towards Pereira, just based off the damage he was able to land. Now, remember, that fight took place in Utah, which is obviously higher up there in elevation. And I think if you're looking to take a grapple-heavy approach at elevation, it's going to be a lot more taxing, which is why we saw Blachowicz slow down as much as he did in that fight. And I think that really played into Pereira's favor. But now he's finally fighting somebody that will likely look to challenge him in the wrestling realm, and that might not play out in Pereira's favor the way that I did against Blachowicz. Now he's going up against Magomed Ankalaev, who's on a 12-fight unbeaten streak. That includes a draw to Jan Blachowicz in a fight where I think we saw a little bit of fight IQ issue from Ankalaev, not getting to the wrestling sooner than he should have, after seeing how effective it was in the 4th and 5th rounds. And credit to Blachowicz, obviously, utilizing his solid leg kicking game to slow Ankalaev down. But I think that we're starting to see the improvements in Ankalaev's game so that that's not as effective against him anymore. I think we saw that in the Alexander Rakic fight. He shut down the calf kicking of Rakic. And I think the one aspect of Ankalaev's game that a lot of people overlook is that he's a very disciplined and technical striker as well. This is a guy that likes to utilize the opposite stance against pretty much all of the opponents he fights. Watch all of his fights. Usually we see him as a southpaw, but when he's fighting another southpaw, he'll fight from the orthodox stance just to try to give them a little bit more of a challenging approach. He loves the open body kick, looking to exploit that power leg that he's able to establish. His straight shots down the pipe, mixes combinations very well from either stance. And then obviously if he needs his wrestling, he can lean on that as well by taking opponents down and smashing them from that top position. I really believe he is the best light heavyweight on the planet. And either whether it's boring performances or getting clipped by Thiago Santos like he did about 6 or 7 fights ago, people are going to rag on Ankalaev. And I don't completely understand it. This guy is very skilled. He's very talented, and when the openings produce themselves, he's able to go out there and finish his opponents. It's just been unfortunate that he's had a few hiccups, like the draw against Blachowicz, the no contest against Johnny Walker, the non-KO KO of Iwan Kutilaba. That's eaten up more of his career than it should have. But luckily, he's finally getting that title shot here against Alex Pereira, and I think this is a spot that he can truly come through for us. Now, one thing that a lot of people are going to harp on during fight week, and I'm calling it now, all week you're going to hear it, people are going to be like, hey, it's Ramadan. That's going to affect Ankalaev's performance, and it might. But I don't think that this is an opportunity that Ankalaev would squabble should Ramadan affect him this much. I think he's going to be more than prepared. I think he's going to be ready to take this challenge. We've seen Belal Muhammad do well during Ramadan. I think Ankalaev has the type of skill and overall game to cause Pereira some issues even during Ramadan, and I think that will allow him to go out there and establish his game. I think his striking will be competitive against Pereira. Obviously, Pereira has a bigger knockout threat. I think Pereira, obviously, his leg kicks will cause Ankalaev some issues, but I don't be surprised if Ankalaev is able to land some big shots of his own. We saw Pereira get knocked out by Israel Adesanya, who's not known to be a crazy one-punch knockout specialist, right? So don't count out a chance that Ankalaev could land a big shot to put Pereira away. But I think Ankalaev is going to have to put on a solid overall performance here to really wear down Pereira, utilizing the wrestling, utilizing the striking, countering effectively, getting back to the wrestling, getting into the clinch, wearing Pereira down, and showcasing that this is mixed martial arts, not kickboxing. He's been getting kickboxers over his last couple of fights, guys that are willing to allow him to operate where he is most confident and most comfortable. Ankalaev will not allow him to do that. So I'm going to go and new here, Magomed Ankalaev, to get a fighter of his skill level at plus 100, who we know has the wrestling to exploit that part of Alex Pereira's game. How could you not? Don't get sucked into the hype of Alex Pereira. I love Pereira just as much as the next guy. But do not let hype snatch you of the chance to get a guy like Magomed Ankalaev at plus money or near plus money. And even if he was the favorite, heck, I would bet him all the way up to minus 185, minus 200 in this spot. He has more paths to victory. He's the more complete fighter overall. If his durability holds up and he mixes the martial arts the way he should, this will look way better than minus 185. Magomed Ankalaev and new light heavyweight champion. There you guys go. UFC 313 broken down in its entirety and dropped on a Sunday. As I promised you guys last week, we're going to continue to keep this train rolling with UFC breakdowns coming down every Sunday. Sorry, did I say Saturday? I meant to say Sunday. Every Sunday, the day after a UFC card, you can expect a breakdown for the next card on the channel. So make sure you guys tune in for that. And again, like I said, a full week of content coming your way. Not just the segments that I dropped for the UFC, but also Legacy Warriors podcast for LFA 203 on Wednesday, and then Legacy Warriors podcast for Cage Warriors 183 on Friday. All that good stuff. KSW and Octagon breakdowns on the Patreon page. Got you guys covered. Good luck on all your action this week, folks. I'll see you guys tomorrow for the top 3 Lock of the Night candidates. Peace.
Last thing.